is Ryan Miller, and for the past 15 years, I've helped hundreds of people to raise millions of dollars for their funds and for their startups. If you're serious about raising money, launching your business, or taking your life to the next level, this show will give you the answers so that you too can enjoy your pursuit of making billions. Let's get into it. If you want to raise capital like Elon Musk or Warren Buffett, then you need to know about the legal changes that will set you free or lock you away. My next guest is a legendary attorney that is here to help you navigate all the rules for raising capital. So the question is, how are you preparing your company to raise money without breaking the law? All this and more coming right now. Here we go. Hey, welcome to another episode of Making Billions. I'm your host, Ryan Miller, and today I have my dear friend, Marty Tate. Marty is a lawyer at KB&A and is one of America's foremost experts on securities regulation and crowdfunding. He was an early innovator for crypto legislation, as well as one of the key contributors to the U.S. Jobs Act. So what this means is that Marty understands how to help you structure your next investment fund, syndication, or capital raise for your project. And he's about to give you a masterclass on how to avoid breaking the rules so that you can win and win more. So Marty, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. It's a honor and a pleasure to be here. I've been following your show for a long time, and it's cool to be, on this side of the screen. So thanks. It's great to be part of the community.
Yeah, and you certainly are part of the community. And, you and I, we've gotten to know each other a little bit offline here. And your experience with contributing to the U.S. Jobs Act, to helping America figure out this new crypto thing and crowdfunding. I mean, you are really rolling up your sleeves, putting your hands in the dirt, and really figuring out how to help people do private deals, crowdfunding, crypto. I mean, you are in all of the big, cool, sexy stuff that we get to work on as emerging fund managers and entrepreneurs. And there's Marty Tate right there with the banner of truth to bring us home to the promised land. So that was a little dramatic intro, but the reality is, in all seriousness, your background and experience has proven to be very, very helpful, not only for emerging fund managers and entrepreneurs, but also for helping people and the government to write some better legislation. So let's jump right into it. Maybe we can address the beginners in this sector. How do beginners get some early points on the board? And more importantly, after that, maybe we can discuss how they can avoid getting knocked out too early in the game. So how do we put some points on the board early on?
So, I think, and I appreciate all of that and the introduction and the compliments, and hopefully I can provide some information that is helpful and help people, as like you said, as they move forward to put points on the board. So what I do, and maybe I'll give a little bit of background and then I can kind of go to your point, but what I do, my practice revolves around primarily two main things. One is I deal with fund formation. I deal with fund managers and fund management companies that are putting together funds. These can be new funds. I have funds that have been together or funds that have been around for 20 years. And so that's working with them, making sure that they structure things correctly, make sure they are doing things in line with the regulations. The other thing that I am active in is in crowdfunding, and mostly helping companies, funds, businesses raise capital using the internet. So the common thread across all of that requires that you navigate securities regulations, which can be really daunting and really difficult. And there's lots of different areas and lots of different laws that you've got to comply with. So the couple things that I would say right out of the gate are surround yourself with good people who have done it before. Talk to lots of people. Talk to people who have had success in your industry. It's really important that you hear their battle stories and hear their do's and don'ts. This is the way that we did it. This is the way to succeed. So I think that's one of the biggest things to do right out of the gate. Just, again, surround yourself with the right people. And those can be, like I said, people that have been in the field. They can be people, they can be lawyers, they can be accountants, they can be, VCs, fund managers, whoever that might be. Another thing is on that same lines is, although you want to surround yourself, you don't want to get yourself too far over your skis. Like, don't immediately go out and say, okay, I want to do this fund and so I'm just going to start, spending money and make sure that you map it out. And a good lawyer is going to help you say, hey, this is where you need to be before you start spending money with me. And again, then just surround yourself, like I said before, with the right professionals, the right lawyers, the right accountants, fund administrators, and so forth, broker dealers, if necessary, that can help you stay in compliance. along the way.
I love it. So the relationships. And so for many people that follow the show, we know that reputation and relationships are your greatest assets in your possession. And Marty certainly advises on the relationship, but guess what? He also advises on your reputation, because if you don't follow the law, that's not great for your reputation. So we definitely want to help folks to align that. Marty, you certainly do a great job doing that. I remember to that point that you talked about, don't overspend if it's your first project, your first startup, your first investment fund, whatever it is. I remember when I started the first legal firm that I contacted, they were like, sure, $150,000. And I think I choked a little bit. I was like, oh my goodness. So I definitely started sweating sitting down. And I thought, wow, is that what it really costs? So I was, early days doing angel investing, and I thought, I'm going to put on my big boy pants and start a fund. And so $150,000, I had a little bit of sticker shock, and I was like, I should have bought that Benz. So instead of a Benzo, you could have bought a fund. And so shopping around, folks, there's a huge range. And Marty, maybe you can kind of help me understand that. But I've seen the cheapest I've ever seen is about 15 grand. And the most expensive I was ever quoted was $1 million. So this is quite the range. But for people starting out, let's say investment funds, I know that's an area that you specialize in. What's a good range that really first time founders should really budget for as far as just getting their foundational legal docs started?
Yeah. And I think that you're right. And you do see all sorts of things. And I think that you could start, I've seen even people say, hey, I can put together a fund for $5,000. You're going to get what you paid for. The lawyer's going to find and replace the last guy's name and probably miss half of the things that he, spell your name wrong and address wrong. So I would say 15 is kind of on the low end. Probably 30 is pretty average. And then if it gets complicated, if you've got offshore aspects, if you've got complicated assets, digital assets, that could be more complicated, right? And so that's going to cost you more. I have a story, maybe I told you this before, but years ago when I was, getting into this, I was hired I wasn't even with a firm. I was moonlighting. I was general counsel for a fund management company, and a large real estate company came and said, hey, help us put together your fund. I said, great, I'm going to charge you $30,000, which is definitely, like I said, on the low end. So we put together their fund documents. They went out, started talking to institutional investors. And again, I wasn't with a firm. I was just kind of Marty Tate, solo guy that's moonlighting as, he's also general partner of Harbor Capital. Put together these fund documents. They went out and said, they were raising $1 billion fund, and some of their investors said, hey, you got to have a name brand on this. So they went out and paid $750,000 for their fund documents. I said, hey, great. When they finished, can I see them? I got them back, and they were just my documents with their name on them. So, so yeah, a lot of times you're paying for the name brand. You're paying, that comes with that. I feel like that trend is going away. I haven't had that problem. I haven't had anybody kick me off the job, in 10 years or so. If we put together your fund, it's going to be accepted. So anyway, so yeah, you can see a range, and again, you just have to be careful.
Man, so you're the muscle. You did all the heavy lifting, and then they just rubber stamped it with their logo on it. That's sad as it is hilarious. I'm not sure what reaction to have to that.
I don't know. They needed that to seal the deal. So great, more power to them. If that meant they were getting a $100 million investor, it was probably worth it. So
yeah, I guess. Yeah. So surround yourself with good people, great lawyers. Don't overspend in the early days. That's how we get some early points on the board. Now, that doesn't tell the whole story. So also, when you're starting out as a serial entrepreneur, first time entrepreneur, and sometimes launching a fund, you're also starting a business. Either way, you can get your wrist slapped a little bit, or worse, if you don't do things properly. So I'm very curious, for the beginners out there, what are some easy things that you can just advise on that would help people to just not lose in the beginning?
Yeah. So, the easiest way to not lose would be to, make sure that, again, losing would be breaking the law, right? So again, surrounding yourself with the right people. We've hit that point enough. The other thing is, as you go out and you start to raise capital, this can be applicable to a fund. This can be applicable to somebody that has a company that says, hey, we're trying to raise money. You want to make sure that you have a plan. You want to understand, who are you raising that money from, and how do you plan on doing it? Those are the two questions I have when people come to me and say, hey, we're going to do you'll maybe hear people say we're going to do a private placement or a PPM or a 506C or a 506B offering. I always say, okay, great. Tell me who it is. So you want to have a really good idea about who you're raising that money from, because that's going to tell you, the regulations you have to comply with. That's going to tell you kind of your limitations. And then know how you're going to do it. Are you going to just raise it? You're going to talk to people you know? Are you going to, put up a billboard? Are you going to have a website? All of those things will determine kind of how we're going to go about doing that. And then also have a really good idea of, sort of your anchor investors. I always tell people that, let's make sure that we've got some people soft circled that are going to invest before we start putting pencil to paper and you start incurring legal costs. So those are, that's really important. Otherwise, you might spend $15,000 or $30,000 and then for a piece of paper that sits on a shelf.
Yeah, lucky you. That would be disturbing every time I looked at that shelf.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm so mad that I spent that money on something that I didn't even use. So, okay. So then retail versus anchor investors versus institutional capital. So be sure, where are you going to raise? When I say retail, I don't know about you, Marty, but I typically just refer to that as typically just regular investors, individual investors, high net worth individuals, just nothing on the institutional side. That was one. And then the other one is, how are you going to market your offering? Whether that's a fund offering, your startup, how are you going to market that? Where are you going to place advertisements? There are some restrictions when it comes to advertising for raising money. And so we just want to make sure that you check in that if I'm going out to raise money, before you talk to Marty or any attorney, make sure you have those figured out. Who am I raising money from and how am I going to market? Would you say that's a fair summary?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Perfect. So let's talk about your industry as far as legal requirements go. I know this is a hot topic, right? So it's better to have this knowledge and not need it than to need it, not have it, and then you're really having a lot of fun. But in the market, I'm just curious, like, what's going on as far as regulatory changes? What are you seeing as far as Gensler and the stuff that they're doing at the SEC? What are you seeing over there?
Yeah. So, and again, the things that I touch on it's pretty broad, right? But I think that, with Chairman Gensler, you're definitely seeing an uptick in regulation. And the biggest thing you've seen is an uptick in enforcement actions. The SEC has really focused on, whether it's increasing their staff, and they've really focused on the bad actors, the people out there that are committing fraud, the people that are, in the industries that are suspect. So you've seen in the crypto space, for example, you've seen a lot of enforcement actions, a lot of settlements with people who have gone out and done token offerings. With respect to fund managers, you are seeing an increased scrutiny as well. That's, in some cases, that makes sense because there are some bad dudes out there. I also represent some companies that honestly, weren't out of line, and the SEC is kind of overstepping. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But you're seeing, with respect to advisors, they came out with a whole new set of proposed rules for investment advisors. One of the big things is under this proposed rule was this, and I think this makes a lot of sense, they prohibited preferential treatment. So one of the things that fund advisors do a lot of times is they'll say, hey, let's enter into a side letter and I'll provide you with, different terms on maybe the management fee or the carry or whatever it might be. And what they've said is basically, if you're going to be doing that, you have to be fair across the board. Now, the example that I just mentioned is actually a bad example because there's nothing, you can still use side letters to have different economics. What they're saying is you can't have preferential redemptions. You can't say, hey, if things go to pot, you get your money out first. You have to treat all the investors the same. The second thing that they basically said is you have to give everybody the same information. You can't give somebody just like special inside information. So those are the two big areas that they proposed changing with regards to side letters and preferential treatment. So that was one of the big things that we saw recently in regulations.
Perfect. Okay. And do you see any how is the market adapting to that? What are some of the strategies that you're seeing people do with some of these changes? Like, how are people adapting? I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
What you're seeing, and where, at least from my perspective, is, we're getting approached by a lot of advisors saying, okay, how do we need to address this thing, or these changes? So I mentioned the side letters. The other changes that have perhaps even a bigger impact is that private fund managers that are registered with the SEC, which isn't everybody. There's some private fund managers that are registered with the state. There are some people that fall under the category of an exempt reporting advisor. And there are some people that are advising on assets that don't fall within the Investment Advisors Act. So private advisors registered with the SEC one of the bigger changes is they now have to provide quarterly statements that talk about your fund level expenses. They also have to get an audit for the fund, which that can be a huge change. And then there's some other financial things. So what we're seeing now is, again, these are proposed rules. And they haven't gone into effect yet, but we're helping people prepare for those as fund advisors.
Perfect. I love that. And honestly, all of those, I know, and there's more regulation. Sometimes the regulated have a little bit of heartburn over it, but everything that you've just said, I see that as a positive. No special treatment, right? If you come into an investment fund, that fund manager has a responsibility to treat you the same as everyone else. Yeah, I think that's a great thing. You must provide audit. And like you said, these are all proposed, but you must provide audited financial statements. Yeah, great. That helps them to trust you. And it also drives further integrity in the industry. It's very hard to be a regulator. As one of my previous guests have said, is regulators tend to tap the brakes until something flies through the windshield. So they're still tapping the brakes a little bit and figuring this out. But regardless, this is not an easy job. So tip of the hat to regulators who are really just trying to drive integrity in the markets, whether it's audit, no special treatment. Be careful with side letters, meaning basically you have a term in your fund that investors get. One of the strategies I can share, whether it's a good strategy or not, but one that I've been seeing, Marty, is that sometimes to provide that equal treatment for all investors, to not give certain special deals to one and not the other, one of the things that we're able to see is just different tiers in your offering. So we say the more you invest, the better terms I can get, and that's available to anybody. So I'm treating you different. So if you want to invest more, you're going to get a better deal. So the typical 220 fund structure, we can actually start tapering that down depending on the commitment size that you invest. Are you seeing anything like that where people have multiple tiers on their offerings to say, we'll give you better terms for a bigger check? Have you seen any of that start happening a little bit more?
Yeah, and I mean that's common, and that's something you've seen, and that's what I've referencing side letters and those different sort of better terms, and that's still allowed, and people can have in their fund documents that, hey, we'll do side letters, and they have to basically disclose that they could offer these better terms. A lot of times what will happen is you'll have an investor come in and say, hey, I want the most favored nation terms, basically whatever the best thing you're giving somebody else, I want it. And if the investor's big enough, then they can force their way into that. Or if somebody comes in and they're going to be your anchor investor and they say, hey, listen, rather than a 2% management fee, we want a 1.5% management fee. So you just have to be aware of that and know that somebody else might come in and ask for better terms. So one is through a side letter. The other is just to basically say, hey, if you write us a check at this size, these are your terms. You write us a check this size, these are your terms. So yeah. Both of which are acceptable.
Yeah, we do that second one as well. So we have kind of prescribed terms with a range of investment. So say better the terms get better, the bigger the check you cut. So that's definitely a strategy. I'm not recommending. I'm not recommending. We're just calling it as it is. So, as we round third base, I'm just curious on what, after all of this experience, all of these things that you've done, I'm wondering if you could just leave behind maybe 2 or 3 things, not just helpful advice from your perspective, but also on how. Well, we'll default to execution on some of these things. But what are 2 or 3 things that you can leave behind with all of your experience for emerging fund managers or even entrepreneurs? What would you say?
Yeah. So one of the things that we get into is that people want to have a lot of flexibility with their fund. A lot of times people, new fund managers especially, want to come and say, hey, we want to do some real estate, but we also want to, if there's a venture deal that comes up, or, hey, if we want to do some loans, we want to be able to do that. And my advice to them is, if you're a first-time fund manager, be specific, be focused on a particular asset class, be an expert and not a generalist, right? I think that, maybe a Warren Buffett, if he comes out with a fund and he says, hey, I'm going to just kind of do whatever I want, I think we would all jump into that because we would trust that. But if you're a first-time fund manager, focus on what you are going to do. Tell your story as saying, hey, this is what we do. We focus on multifamily properties in this size of markets, or we do self-storage in third-tier markets. So whatever it might be, something that right? Versus sort of the Frankenstein fund where you're trying to say, hey, we can kind of do whatever. And the reason I say that is, one, there's some legal reasons behind it, because if you're trying to do a lot of different things, you're potentially exposing yourself to, failure or liability in a bunch of different areas, and claims that your investors could come back and say, hey, you weren't focused, you weren't an expert. But the bigger thing is just it's harder to raise capital. Like if I get a lot of deals across my desk, and the people that are focused and say, this is what we do. We just are raising capital for this type of deals. It's we are raising capital for a preferred debt, or, on commercial property, or we're raising capital to invest in single family homes in this market. That's going to be, or fix and flips in this market. And this is our experience with that. That's going to be, I think that's a big advantage that, when you're going out and trying to raise capital, and going to help you in that effort.
I love it. And as the saying goes, better be 2 inches wide and 100 miles deep than 100 miles wide and 2 inches deep. So I remember one person launching a fund, and he was like, Ryan, I got the best idea. So sometimes we use big words like multi-strat fund, right? It makes you sound real smart. But so he said, Ryan, I have the best idea for a fund. And I said, dude, that's awesome. Tell me about it. And he said, okay, you ready for this? And I was like, I don't know, man. This is quite the buildup. What are you going to say? And he said, okay, you're going to love this. He said, we're going to invest. We're going to go to investors, and we're going to invest in crypto, cattle, and real estate. And I said, I have no words. I totally cut me off. I was like, I mean, who am I to say that it's right or wrong? But I've never heard of that. And so to Marty's point, it's not that it was right or wrong. This is just my opinion and my observations. So Marty, feel free to disagree. But my first thought was not, oh, that's not going to work. I don't think like that. I was like, I mean, I know what I know, but maybe it will. I don't know any of that stuff. But the thing that I thought about is putting myself in an investor's shoes. You have to give them a clear line of sight for profit. And so when you're like, hey, man, give me $1 million and we're going to put it in crypto, cattle, and real estate. And he's like, I don't see like Profit Town on the other side of it. I like you're all over the place. And number two, it's really hard for me to really believe that you are the best expert I'm going to find in all three. Right. I believe you're good at one, or like, so you got to help me understand. Do you have the team, and the team individually has experts? And then on top of that, weaving these three bizarre asset classes or great asset classes into a bizarre combo. I'm like, is that going to be something that I'll enjoy? And so to your point, Marty, it is better to be an expert in one area than this generalist. Not necessarily because it's a bad investment thesis. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I think more importantly, from my perspective, is just saying, as an investor, I just need to see that clear line of sight. I need to see the shore on the other side of what you're asking me to take a boat across. I still need to see land on the other side. And if you've created this blurry vision and smoke and fog and I can't see anything, it's going to be really hard for you to raise capital. Do you have anything you can add to that? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, no, that is a fair summary. It's funny. I can almost one up you in that I was approached by, maybe it's the same guy. I don't know. It sounded like, so he had crypto, bison, so kind of cattle, bison, and cannabis. So, I don't know. Maybe we're missing something here that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we're the dumb ones. I don't know.
Maybe there's a crossover that we're just not seeing. But no, I think that's important that you're focused, and I think that the best managers will bring their experience in, whether it's in real estate or whether it's in precious metals or whether it's in oil and gas. They'll bring that to the table, and that's what you want to see. As an investor, is, they have the experience. They've done this before. Not, hey, this is our first time. It might be the first time of a fund, but it's not the first time that they're, to circle back around. It's not our first rodeo. It's not our first crypto, cannabis, real estate rodeo. But yeah, so I think that's, that would probably be the first thing I would say. The second thing is, once you get into it, like once you've started your fund and you've raised money from investors, or, whether it's a fund or whether it's just you're running a company and you've brought in investors, you brought in, friends and family or people that, venture capitalists or whoever it might be that have invested, make sure that you're communicating. I think one of the biggest complaints that we get from, if we get investors that are coming and saying, they're upset about an investment or they want to bring an action against a company, it's because they're not hearing from the company or the fund isn't communicating. So the more communication that you can give, the better. And, I think that even if it's bad news, right, you want to make sure that you're always just staying on top of it. That tends to create, a trust it's like a relationship. If you can tell somebody the bad news, then they're going to trust you more, with the good news. So I think that's important.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I remember one of our former guests, I believe I told you about him in another time we spoke. He has a $4 billion fund. He was on the shows, and he's Michael Episcope, and wonderful man. I encourage everybody listening to really investigate all the cool stuff that he's doing over there in Chicago. So, but he actually gave this expression, and he echoes the same thing, Marty, that you mentioned, which was his exact words were, we walk out good news, we run out bad news. And so really that investor communication is something that I agree. It can be not appreciated until you wish you did. And if there's that moment of regret, wishing that you ran the bad news out the door, because that goes back to your reputation, right? So you never want to be perceived as skewing information, slow rowing your investors, or anything like that, just being a bad communicator. But if you're like, hey, I trust this guy, even if I don't like the words that come out of Ryan's mouth or Marty's mouth, I know I can trust it. Even if I don't like it, I can trust it. And that is important, friends. It's important for your investors, whoever they are. If you're a fund manager or an entrepreneur, your investors need to trust you. They need to trust, warts and all, as sometimes they say, that you're going to reveal the entire outcome on that. I love it. What would be a third thing that you could say as a piece of advice, parting advice for our friends around the world?
I'll probably go full circle back to where we started, which was just, again, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to say this, but just compliance, making sure that you, again, are surrounding yourself with the right people so that you are following the laws. So for example, with a fund, there are multiple silos of regulations that you have to navigate. You have to regulate the Securities Act of 1933. You have to navigate the Investment Advisors Act. You have to navigate the Investment Company Act. And a lot of times people think because they've done one, they ignore the other areas. And so they'll say, hey, well, we are a Reg D fund, a 506C fund. They're like, well, we're good. But they don't realize that there's all these areas of compliance they have to follow. So again, surround yourself with the right people. Make sure you've got a good team, a good lawyer, a good, accountant that can help you with things, that you've got perhaps even a chief compliance officer that can help you navigate through all of those advisory things. So if you're managing a fund, generally, unless it's, you fall in an exemption, you're going to have to also be an investment advisor, which means you're going to have to register with the SEC or with the state. And that's going to require compliance. It's going to mean you will have to comply with FINRA rules, and you'll have to register with FINRA. So there's, another regulatory agency there that you've got to deal with. So making sure that you have either, like I said, a part-time compliance officer, full-time compliance officer, or a really good lawyer that can help you with those things. All of that's going to be helpful. It's going to help you avoid, audits. It's going to help you avoid penalties and fines. It could also keep you out of jail. So make sure that I'm going full circle, but back to where I started, which is surround yourself with the right people and the right people that can help you be compliant going forward.
I love it. So as we wrap things up, is there any parting advice, anything at all you'd like our fans to know, how to reach out to you, how to find you if they want to get to know you better or really enjoy the depth of your knowledge? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so probably the best way is you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me, my company's website is kba.law. You can email me at mtate@kba.law, or I think I'm also on Twitter and Threads and everything else. So I'm out there. I also have, I've participated in panels and things. A lot of those are online as well. So if you want to find out more, I'm sure you just Google me and you can take what you want from what you can find.
Awesome, my man. So just to summarize everything that Marty and I have talked about, it's better to be an expert. Be an expert, not a generalist. The second thing that he mentioned is communicating with your investors is absolutely critical. Really prioritize excellence in that area. And of course, compliance is extremely, extremely important. So make sure that you design your business with compliance in mind. You do these things and you too will be well on your way in your pursuit of making billions.
Wow, what a show. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Now, if you haven't done so already, be sure to leave a comment and review on new ideas and guests you want me to bring on for future episodes. Plus, why don't you head over to YouTube and see extra takes while you get to know our guests even better. And make sure to come back for our next episode where we dive even deeper into the people, the process, and the perspectives of both investors and founders. Until then, my friends, stay hungry, focus on your goals, and keep grinding towards your dream of making billions.